We've recorded some podcasts in some cool places, but
This wins.
It's kind of, I don't know, man.
Yeah, you guys missed it earlier. The monkeys were in here jumping on the roofs and everything, so making all this noise.
Will they be here tonight?
You heard it? That's the monkey. Anyway,
Oh.
yeah, hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to their trees to roost for the evening. So you probably won't see them till the morning. In the morning, though, they'll make some noise, and you'll be like, "Damn it, I want to sleep."
Well, thanks, Erik, for bringing us out here.
Man, it's great to have you. I mean, like, you're finally in my world. Do you remember the first podcast we tried to do?
Of course.
And I was sitting on the edge of this site that we had, our very first site in Kenya,
On an iPhone.
and you're trying to do it on an iPhone. We couldn't get the connectivity to work, and you're like, "This isn't going to work. Kill it." And I was like, "Damn, what the hell?"
And then you meant to
Yeah.
come to London.
Yeah, then we tried to come to
Bedford.
London, and then you got sick,
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, yeah. So it's fun to actually be in person for. Actually, this is the second time we've done a podcast in person.
Yeah, we did
but,
Miami the
Yeah.
last time.
Yes, that's right.
Well, whenever these projects come up, we're always like, we're always determined to see every project if we can. It kind of started with Michael Peterson, where I met him in Uruguay, and he was like, at the BitConf outside, and he was like, "Yeah, I've got this project in El Salvador. I just want to tell you about it." I was like, "Give me a second." I checked my phone. It's like, I can be there in 2 days. So I went and saw it. So you kind of want to see everything.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you can't understand. You could get a little bit from talking to you, but you got to come out and see this.
well, it's context. Like, what can you squeeze into an hour podcast? Right? You can't squeeze like the atmosphere. You can't squeeze like what's going on in the community. You can't squeeze any of that in.
But it's also knowing what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I can ask about what you're doing, and then you tell me, and then I can ask more questions based on that. But now I've got some context from 4 days in Ghana and 12 hours here. I've got questions now I wouldn't have had before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Based on that.
And by the time you finish with this trip, you're gonna have questions that you thought of that were like, "Oh, why didn't I ask that earlier on?" Because you just get more context.
Well, one of the important things that we had an interview with Femi, and one of the things I'm really conscious about is trying not to say what Africa needs for Bitcoin, what Africa, trying to solve it for them, because it's like, what do I know? I don't know. I've never lived here. I don't know the problems. I've not walked the shoes. But he put it even better. He said, just like, shut up and listen. Like, just shut up and listen.
Femi is one of the best guys to speak about the Bitcoin story in Africa because of his background, right? As the guy who leads B-Trust Builders. And so he's dealing with guys who are actually building tools for everyday Africans every day. And so he's going to have an insight into things that most of us don't have, even guys like me, right? I'm just doing mining, right? I have a very different context, but he has a much broader remit, and that gives him more insight into it.
Well, let me tell you something that I'm starting to spot that's coming up a lot, that I'm starting to see. We've traveled a lot with this. We've made films in the UK, El Salvador. We've made them in Argentina, Lebanon. We're now here. And what I've consistently noticed is that there are two ends of the economic spectrum that aren't really touching Bitcoin. I think the richest in society aren't, because most of them don't really need it. Mm-hmm. And the poorest aren't because they tend to be living hand to mouth. So, when Ghana, we went down to the market. Most people there are just trying to make as much money as they can to survive. Somebody actually said to us, they said, if you offer them $50 now, $100 next week, they take the $50 now because they want to live today.
That was me, yeah.
Oh, that was you? Yeah. I was trying to remember, wasn't it? Yeah, it was you. Okay, so you told me that. But I saw the same in Argentina.
Yeah.
Same in Lebanon. Bitcoin adoption appears to me to be consistently within the middle class. So it brings up two questions for me. The first question I'm asking myself is, I don't really give a fuck too much about the riches, but why aren't we reaching the people on the lowest end of the economic spectrum? But my second question I'm asking myself, actually, is this a good thing? Because we talk about the fiat destruction of the world. It tends to be, you most see it through the destruction of the middle class. And is Bitcoin rebuilding the middle class, which will actually create the new capital allocators? So perhaps it's a good thing, but I'm wrestling with both of these.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not probably the best person to answer either of those, just because I think those are some pretty deep questions, and you have to go into there's a lot of nuance in just like the poverty side, right? Like, what do poor people do anywhere in the world, and why do they do it? how much mental stress is built up in just trying to find money to eat and maybe send their kids to school, and that's it. And so, like, any extra mental work to learn about something new, like, who has the luxury of that? Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that you come across is like, I don't have time for this thing, and so where am I even gonna be approached about it, and why would I even put any of my mental processes to that when I have things lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that are more important to me right now. And it really means the next 24 hours. What happens over the next 24 hours has a big impact on the following 24 hours and the following 24 hours. And so middle class makes a lot of sense because it has the luxury of time, has the luxury of processing. And somebody who studies this and is much smarter than me can probably explain it better, but I would think that is at least part of the problem.
So 2 countries in, we haven't spent a lot of time here. So our observations are based purely on a few days in Accra and 12 hours here. Again, the problems that I'm seeing are still the same everywhere. They're the same problems that I see in the UK and the same problems I see in Ghana, or the same problems I see anywhere.
What are those problems?
But there is nuance. Okay, so the same problems are, firstly, everybody wants to earn a living, provide for their family, have a roof over their head, eat, and hopefully build a future, right? But there is inflation everywhere, devaluation everywhere. People are struggling everywhere. It's all relative. How someone's struggling in Accra could be very different from how someone is struggling in the UK. But to them, their lived experience is still a struggle, right?
Right.
And so we clearly have this fiat problem that exists everywhere. The Western world, the developed world, it seems to be the same everywhere.
It can be a matter of degrees, though, right?
There's massive differences on why it's happening.
3 weeks ago in Malawi, the Malawi kwacha lost 44% of its value.
Lost or was taken away?
Yes. Exactly. It was taken away, right? And I mean, that's crazy, right? Can you imagine the poor or
I think you should explain what happened there because people won't have context for that.
Okay, but a quick question for you though. Like, if that happened in London to people, what would they do?
Well, there would be riots, like literal riots.
Right. It's like, so you have a different society and different culture in each place as well, right? And how they deal with stress and the changes around them are very different. Like, who feels empowered to do something here? Very few, obviously, right? Because there's not riots in the streets about that. Sorry, you had a question though.
No, I just think it would be good to explain what actually happened there because people won't know.
So overnight, the government decided that that by fiat, by their decision, that the value of the kwacha was going to be 44% less than it was the day before. So people woke up to a change in the value of the kwacha that they had lost 44% of their buying power overnight. So I remember South African Airlines, they shut down people being able to buy tickets. Grocery stores shut down so they could go change all their pricing. Everybody had to just shift all of a sudden to this new reality. And it's not even in a quote unquote democracy, there's no democratic process around money like this. This is done by fiat, by the people in charge, and they make those decisions. And it's quite unfair.
So
right?
There's 2 exchange rates here, though, right? There's like the real one and the black market exchange.
There
rate.
always is. Right?
So what happened to the black market exchange rate across those few days?
So that's where you have to talk to somebody who lives in Malawi. I live in Kenya, so I don't know what happened in real time then. But obviously what normally happens. So I grew up in Sudan, right? In Sudan, we had a black market. And I remember being in Khartoum in my high school years, and the value of the US dollar to the Sudanese pound was 7 in the bank. And you had to use the bank if you were doing official business. But on the street, it was closer to 70. So it was a 10x difference, right? And that has a massive effect on how businesses operate, how individuals operate. And so, there's this almost like this fake other world that some people have to pretend that they're in, and then everybody else uses the black market.
But they're basically stealing the difference.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's the issue here, and that's where even your own prime minister was trying to explain what happens with inflation, and it's the other side of the coin of the same problem, right? Like how you're monkeying with the money, the value of money, or the pricing of goods, and it is taking away the value from ordinary people for their lives, right? And it's being done by a government entity that doesn't have anybody who's holding them accountable to it.
That was actually a wild moment to see our Prime Minister argue with the BBC about what inflation is. So for people who haven't heard it, they should just Google it, because he was saying inflation is a hidden tax. He was arguing the truth. It was so weird to see.
Yeah, the reporter was asking how he was going to provide tax breaks, and he said, well, the first one I want to do is bring down inflation because inflation's a tax, and she would not accept
She wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure she's not the expert in that.
Yes.
Yeah, but to hear a Prime Minister admit that, I mean, you
No,
want him to
it's
go
pretty
one
wild.
step further and say, oh yeah, by the way, we caused it. We're the ones who did this.
Well, he's a politician after all.
Yeah.
It's not going to go that far.
Yeah, but it was fascinating to see. So, across Africa, just so I can understand again, only been here for 5 days. Don't want to act like some
I'm
kind
new
of
to
expert.
Africa, I'm here to fix it.
Yeah, I'm new to Africa. I'm here to fix it. How similar are the problems from country to country?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. I would say things are more similar than they're not.
Okay.
And that's money, that's oftentimes business, that's oftentimes whatever the government does, democracy, or sometimes corruption, or it's just how people act. There's more alike than unalike in these different countries. It changes on sub-region. So East and Southern Africa feel very different than West Africa, which feels very different than North Africa. So you do have those changes. But within those sub-regions, they feel a lot alike. Especially if you kind of just step back a little bit and kind of blur your eyes, you can feel it, right? Anybody who's in those countries will say, no, we're way different than our friends across the border. But, it's a smaller degree.
Okay. How much truth is there to Africa, to the economic imperialism, which Alex Gladstein has written about, whereby us in the West have benefited from punishing harsh loans placed on countries here? And how much truth is there to there's certain blocks that are put in place that really, it's almost like we've got a foot on the shoulder of African nations, stopping them ever really achieving their full potential?
You don't have a foot on the shoulder, you have a foot on the neck. The IMF and the World Bank, it's not what you think happens, it's the numbers prove it, right? There's no argument here, right? The numbers prove what has been happening. The fact that since 1982, there's been a reverse flow of more money leaving the emerging markets and going to the rich countries that own the IMF and the World Bank is pretty self-explanatory, right? You don't have to actually, you don't have to do too much explaining after you've started to look at the actual data. The numbers tell the story.
It feels shit. I was saying to Femi in the interview, I was like, it feels crap, because I obviously grew up aware of historical colonial past of the UK. It's not great, but like these are before my times. And I know there's you still have a lived benefit from that. But now I'm realizing like there's a current lived benefit from the policies of Western countries and what they've done to Africa. And it's like, fuck, what do I do?
Yeah. Well, so there's a shared burden here that we don't always talk about. There's what the West pushes on with everybody. And then there's also the leadership in the countries in Africa or everywhere else too that have the same problems that we also have to acknowledge. Leadership in our own countries are part of the problem. They're the ones taking the bait. They know it's going to happen. They know they're going to disappear and it's going to be the next guy's problem. And that guy's going to take the bait again because he knows he can do something with that. And then he's going to leave it to the next person. And so in Africa too, there's some responsibility for, who are you allowing into government and leadership to make these decisions and be a part of this? And are you holding them accountable too? There is two sides to this coin, right? So sure, there can be some and should be some culpability on the side of the countries that own the IMF and the World Bank, but there should also be some on the countries that are partaking in it and making the agreements, signing the agreements.
Yeah, but how do you stop that? If you're propping up corrupt people or...
Yeah, you need. I mean, this is again way beyond my pay grade, right? I don't know how you stop that. Besides, everything breaks. I don't know how else you stop. I mean, it's this juggernaut now.
Juggernaut of what? Of just rich, corrupt politicians all throughout Africa.
Well, yeah, that and a juggernaut of this massive beast of an organization that's just pushing this thing because this is how we do things. Like it's any bureaucracy in the world, right? It's like it has its life of its own. So both of them have their own like impetus that isn't going to change anytime soon. So I don't know how you get away from that. And that's just because it's way beyond what I know.
When we were in Lebanon, we were hearing similar stories about the corruption. And essentially, they divided up all the public services to all the politicians. But the 10 richest people in Lebanon are all politicians. Every single one of them, and they're all billionaires.
Yeah,
the country has collapsed. Yeah. There's no functional government anymore. Nothing works, and yet you have endless billionaire politicians. So
I remember seeing this statistic from South Africa in the early 2000s. That was really interesting. It was the only country at that point in Africa that had a split in the wealthiest of the country between political and economic class. In the rest of the continent in Africa, it was there was a mirror of each other. The same people who had economic power were the same people who had political power, just like Lebanon, right? So it's interesting that you can have countries that do have a split on that, but the closer those two things come together, obviously, the worse off you're going to be because you start really marginalizing everybody but the wealthiest.
Right. Okay. So for you working out here and the work you're doing, and your understanding of Bitcoin here, where do you think the biggest opportunities are? Because again, I'm really wrestling with this, Erik. I'm trying to wrestle with the ideas. And one of the things I've realized, is Bitcoin is just like a system, and you can kind of use it and go into it and either get spat out or create the benefits that are for you as an individual. And one of the things Femi really said, he said, the really interesting thing is that Bitcoin kind of has an identity problem at the moment because everything that everyone in the West is talking about, how they want to use Bitcoin on the benefits, he's like, it's completely different here. The benefits and needs that people in Africa can take are completely different. But my headspace is in, we went to that market. It's like, what do we do here? You're not going to go and teach some guy who's, selling trainers or just got a food store, hey, you should accept Bitcoin because he's got no Bitcoin customers. So what do you do? But I quite like this idea of seeding densities of Bitcoin capital and creating circular economies because they can grow. We saw in El Zonte. Michael Peterson started. He had a density of Bitcoin capital. He would give these kids jobs to do. He would pay them in Bitcoin, and they could spend that Bitcoin in the local shop. And it created this circular economy that grew. And now everywhere in El Zonte accepts Bitcoin. Bitcoiners travel there and spend their Bitcoin, and this density has grown. And as that density grows and the price appreciates, El Zonte becomes richer and development happens there. Now, listen, they have an advantage. It's a holiday destination. You can go there and go surfing. That same kind of thing might not work in every town.
I think the other advantage they had as well is they had a benefactor from very early who gave a lot of Bitcoin to that area, so it could be distributed. If you're trying to start an area without that, it becomes much harder.
But it's still a density of Bitcoin. It's still a density that can create something. And I'm thinking, is that the best thing? To go to an area, does the work you do create a density of Bitcoin in that area that can spark a circular economy that can organically grow?
No,
it can't do that.
It could. That's not what happens today, right? You could come up with a plan to how you would integrate Bitcoin usage into the community that's being served by the electricity that we go and partner with, right? But I think there's layers to this, right? So we often think, at least what I see in that kind of Bitcoin Twitter, Bitcoin kind of news pieces and newsletters, right? A lot of people they think they separate these two things. There's the Bitcoin usage by ordinary people, what they do with it, and then there's the mining, right? The network, the Bitcoin network itself, and what runs. And what I think the cognitive dissonance I have on that is that I'm not in that usage space, right? I'm not. I don't do community stuff besides hanging out with the Bitcoiners in Nairobi, right? That's what I do. But however, there's this really interesting place where there is at least a Bitcoin maybe shadow effect from the energy side, right? And it could lead to further integration. And you know what would be interesting about that? It would really make sense. So for example, right, you guys know we partner with a power provider, a small run-of-river hydro site, and you're going to see one tomorrow, right? That community gets meters in their home, and they send mobile money today to pay for their power. And when it's run out of Malawi and Kwacha, the lights go off, okay? And then they send more money in, and it turns back on again. Is there any reason why the power provider here couldn't be paid in Lightning instead? And then you maybe, because people don't want to really have this cognitive load of learning a new currency, maybe you use something like Fedi even, and that's just an e-kwacha to them. It's just like a mobile kwacha. They don't even know what's going on behind the scenes. They're just paying for their power with it. That becomes interesting, right? And I think what we often miss is that we really have to look at what people need and what people will use, right? And go to them and do real things that matter in their lives instead of having some fantasy of what we think people will want. And this is product developers everywhere in the world with all customers, right? There's so many people who fantasize of what things might be instead of actually doing what people need.
Do you think that comes from people not actually going to see places and really understand what's happening locally?
I mean, absolutely. But I also think people should build for where they are.
Okay.
Right? Like you don't need to, okay. Should I send some Kenyans to build something for guys in London?
Probably not.
Right? I mean, maybe if they've moved there and they're building stuff because they live there, that makes sense, right? But honestly, we shouldn't be thinking about this as some type of like missionary activity, right? This is something that you build for what you need in your own area, right? So when you see guys who are working with Fimi at B-Trust Builders and they're coming up with this app that allows you to go to an agent. This is my favorite one from this week, right? Splice, right? This app that was built by five people, I think. One from Cameroon, one from Uganda, a couple from Kenya. They were from all over Africa, right? And they built this app that you could walk up to any agent, give them cash in Kenya, let's say, and I could send it to Ghana, to another agent, and they would receive it, and they'd be able to hand out cash to the other person. It was writing on Lightning rails. The whole thing was written and working, and it works today. Like they made it work. Like that's the kind of thing that's useful because you know what they realized is that everybody's talking peer-to-peer, this and this and this. No, Africans go to agents. There's agents in every little town and village out in this valley.
Little
right?
boxes.
Everywhere. There's agents all over this damn place, right? So why would I do peer-to-peer if I can walk to, John down here that I've been working with for the last 10 years on anything I need to do, any transaction, and just say, hey, can you do this for me?
What are the complexities around cross-border transactions around here?
I mean, just
Currency to
cost
currency.
and speed, right?
Okay.
So the difference between doing it through the what's the normal mobile network and just using those rails instead of the Bitcoin and Lightning rails is that the Bitcoin Lightning rails are literally, I mean, in 2 seconds that transaction happened from Kenya to Ghana in real time. Like we saw it on stage. It was amazing.
Okay. So that works if you can use the payment rails and then get the local currency. But if you say use the Fedi and you had like an e-quattro, it's still going to be essentially Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
it's going to be subject to the
Yeah,
volatility.
it's like a layer 3, right?
Yeah, I can't.
Unless you had a stable coin on Fedi.
Well, that's the thing, because I still, you talked about when they'd close down the stores, the grocery stores, to reprice everything with a 40% drop. We've had 20% in the last week, 10% in the last week of Bitcoin going up, but it can go down. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure the volatility of Bitcoin is not going to be helpful to most people around here.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think so. This is where everybody's like, well, Bitcoin at least is useful as a savings technology, Yes.
If you've got money to save.
If you have money to save, number one. And two, you can deal with the volatility over a certain amount of time. You'll see a lot of African savings aren't always savings for as long as maybe you or I think about savings.
4 years.
Plus,
Yeah.
right? They're thinking about savings as in 3 months or 7 months or a year, right? And then the volatility can hurt them. So you can actually harm people by suggesting they should be doing the savings if they don't have the capability and the time horizon to do so.
Okay, so based on all that then, and based on what you know here, where is the opportunity? Where is the real opportunity to help?
So I wouldn't phrase it that way. I
Okay.
would say the real opportunity to see returns.
Okay, as an
Right.
investor.
Yes.
Okay.
Like you should be investing in these guys from like B Trust Builders who are making things for people that they know and work with in their own towns in Africa, right? Those guys are building for the real needs today. The one that won was called Bit Pension, and I wasn't paying any attention to pensions. I don't like across Africa. Apparently, it's a massive issue in Nigeria, right?
Okay, I was assuming for most people a pension isn't a thing. They just don't.
For government workers,
Well, of course,
right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Teachers unions, things like that. It does, right? So
Yeah.
they do exist here, and the pensions do at least in certain countries, not everyone, right?
Yeah.
And it was a big deal, right? So for the Nigerians, this is like, yeah, this made a ton of sense. This is a great way for pensions to be kept, right? And I was like, I would never have thought about that. And guess what? Some software engineer in Silicon Valley definitely wouldn't have thought about that for something to build in Africa, right? And that's the beauty of finding guys who can actually build things on the local level and put money behind them and let them build something, that gets some traction and gets some usage in their own community.
So invest in.
Same thing Femi said.
Yeah.
And he said that the risk reward is much higher because you actually have to invest a lot less money.
That's true too. Like the cost of investment is significantly less, sometimes 10 times less.
On the regulation side, again, I'm just asking broadly because there's a lot of countries in Africa. Are governments anti-Bitcoin? Are they pro? Do they not even understand it? What?
There's a number of countries. No, there's a few countries that are anti-Bitcoin usage. So you'll go to like Rwanda or Ethiopia, tight currency controls. So there's certain countries that are really not for it, right? That doesn't mean they're against mining, because mining is something that doesn't happen within their population, right? So they see that separately. But the usage of Bitcoin is, really, really looked at as a bad thing by the government because it decreases their power in the country, right? So, more countries like Kenya are looking at a finance bill that has a digital currency tax regime.
Okay.
But we don't know what it looks like yet. There's some that are coming, but it's mostly for transactions of use of digital currency.
How will they tax that if it's peer to peer? Because
Yes, that's TBD.
well, it was interesting. So in Accra, they talked about the taxes going up, and there was a lot of cash payments. I was like, well, how do they tax these people? And they said they tax at the point of imports. That's where they take it. So everything people are trying to buy and sell, that's where they tax.
So in Kenya, the Kenya Revenue Authority has been given the green light to gather all the mobile money transaction data for everybody in the country. So then they can balance that against what this person was supposed to pay the government, or this company was supposedly supposed to pay the government. So they're getting really, really aggressive. And what that means is people are moving back to cash.
Huh. Is there any risk of that with M-Pesa?
No, that's exactly what it is.
With M-Pesa.
It's using M-Pesa, yeah.
Okay, because I saw it being used for the first time today, and it was quite incredible, really.
Yeah. When you get to Kenya, you'll see it used everywhere.
Why was it incredible?
Because it was, so at first it felt like PayPal. That's what it felt like at first. When I was first showing it, you can send and receive money. But actually, it was so much more, because you could, we were at a retail store, we're about to buy something, but also I can then deposit money with them and they give me cash. So I can deposit cash with them, and that they will take it and it goes into my account and my balance, and equally I could withdraw from them.
So it works like an ATM as well.
Yeah, it was like an ATM, a payment system. It was like every possible financial scenario you would want
But it's like an ATM with
Well,
additional
so
surveillance,
think
I
of
guess.
agents. This is back to agents across Africa. That's actually the gateway, right? Is that they are all of the things that you would think of a bank in both analog and digital space at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so there's some great stories about around the genesis, right, of M-Pesa, and how the banks didn't really think this was a big deal, and they kind of let it go. And as soon as the rest of the country saw what happened with mobile money in Kenya because of M-Pesa, the banking groups in each of these other countries started closing ranks. So mobile money really couldn't take off in their own country. It was quite phenomenal to watch. Like South Africa really came together, banks came together and blocked a lot of the features that M-Pesa does in Kenya when they tried to do it in South Africa.
How much is M-Pesa used in Kenya? Is it literally everybody?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Absolutely everyone. It moves, I think, the GDP of the country every month.
Wow.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the typical government wants money, finds something that works, taxes it to the point of breaking it?
Yeah, I think we have stories about golden geese that are similar.
What's that? Sorry?
You don't kill the golden goose. Yeah, right.
They kill every golden goose.
Yeah, that's what governments do, right? Is they look at this thing and they say, okay, well, can I take a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more? And there's like you've heard of the Laffer curve on taxation and things, right?
Yes.
And that's where this kind of comes in. It's like, at what point does the taxation really override the value of the government, period, but also the kind of everyday Kenyan or South African or Malawian's position on what are they going to do in real life? Because once it gets so high, they're like, well, guess what? I'm going to just go around this system then. I'm not going to use that system anymore because I can't live. And when you can't live, then things break.
Well, I saw the exact same thing. So in Argentina, they essentially have two economies there now. There were certain places going to say, look, if you pay with the Argentine peso, this is the price, but you pay with the dollar as this price, it was lower because the dollars were outside of the system and they wanted the dollars.
Amazingly, I've even seen it in Australia a little bit. There's a little town called Byron Bay, which is like a little hippie town. It's really good. And there they will give you discount for paying in cash over card. And I love that because like cash is absolutely dying in Australia quicker than anywhere. Like ATMs have stopped actually giving you cash. Like you can't withdraw cash from ATMs at a lot of places now.
Hold on, you can't withdraw cash?
Not everywhere, absolutely not
You
everywhere.
can't
But
withdraw cash from an ATM.
Yeah, the deposit.
What's the ATM for?
Deposit only.
Really?
A few, but it started. So it's absolutely not everyone. You still can withdraw cash from ATMs, but it has started at a few. So the fact that this little town are like revolting against it because they don't like the surveillance, I think is fucking brilliant.
So I'm curious for a question for you guys, right?
Yeah.
Give me one or two of the kind of curious things that you've been trying to figure out. Because when you first land, you have new eyes on stuff. What isn't making sense?
Oh, I tell you what isn't making sense coming here. And again, fully conscious, I was only in Accra. I didn't go to any other parts of Ghana. But when I was in Lebanon, we were in Beirut and everything was like seemed pretty cool. They were building things up, but I was conscious of the community I was in. So we went out to, I pronounce this correct, Zahi is another place in Lebanon where it wasn't the same as Beirut. It was desperate and poor. But we've come here to Malawi, we've been told, but Malawi is basically one of, if not the poorest country in
the world.
In the world, yeah.
It's top 7 poorest, yeah.
But it doesn't feel poor. As we were driving through the towns, it kind of had all the same kind of shops we'd have in the UK, just different versions. Maybe the buildings aren't as new and the architecture's not as new, but it was like all the same, and there was a lot of them. And it doesn't feel desperate here. It doesn't look desperate. Whereas in Accra, it looked hard. It looked desperate. And I couldn't understand. It didn't add up to me.
I think some of that's urban versus rural. Like we're in rural Africa now, right? And
So would we have seen the same in Ghana, rural Ghana?
Probably more the same than different,
Okay.
yes. But here's the other thing. I think that Malawi really shows you, it's a poor country, but maybe there's not as much of a correlation between money and happiness as you thought.
Yeah, if anything, it definitely feels less edgy here than in Accra.
Well, what they have the luxury of here is a lot of things grow easily. People can build their own houses. You see a lot of those piles of bricks that they're making, and they use that to build their houses. So they can make their own bricks. And then they buy some tin roof, and then they put that on top, and they have a house, and they can grow their own food. So they have the basics taken care of, and that means that while they might not be rich in money, they have the things they need in life.
Okay.
One thing that really stood out to me, Pete interviewed a lady in the market in Accra, and she said that everyone's now a seller and no one's buying. And that's something that I just couldn't figure out how that's even possible. Like, how has the market not collapsed if there's far more sellers than buyers?
Yeah. I mean, somebody's got to be buying.
She
At
did
some
say
point.
that, didn't
Yeah,
she?
she
Yeah.
did. Yeah, I think what it is I think she was basically saying because there's no factories, or there's less factories, there's less job creation. People are having to hustle, and so yeah, she's got a lot more competition now. And my assumption is that everyone's reducing their prices, and it's like this race to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so you get that. I mean, in Africa, the market is a cutthroat space. I mean, the literal market, right, is a cutthroat space because it's like you're selling that mop for 100 CDs, and the other person's selling it for 105. People will go and buy the 100 one, even if the quality is lower, right? So, there's a real price consciousness on the continent by the majority of people, and so that affects how that market works as a whole. So it is a margins game.
And another thing I'm curious about is why people aren't more hostile towards us, knowing full well the foot on the neck that the West has put on Africa.
They don't.
Yeah. Do
No,
they
they
just
don't.
not understand?
Well, no. I mean, well, first of all, okay, a couple things are at play here. Number one, you represent money. Why would you be mean to the guy who's going to give you money? You're hoping will give you money. Okay.
But I just expected a bit more hostility.
I mean, maybe not, right? Like, again, okay, there's a couple of psychological things going on here, right? Number one, keep what I said in mind. Are you going to be harsh on somebody who might represent money to you?
Yeah, fair.
And you are living hand to mouth, are you?
Yeah, fair.
Right? No, you're not, right? And then the second thing is, while there might even be conversations amongst everybody about where, it's unfair or it's not right where we are versus where they are, it doesn't necessarily mean you individually. It means you as a group, right? And you don't necessarily represent that whole group to them, right? So I think there's some psychology at play there that makes it, when you can look somebody in the eye, right, you can see them as a person. And so when you're in the market, you're on the street, you're talking to somebody and you're seeing them, and it's much harder to just be a dick.
Another thing that stands out to me, like clear as day, is that you don't have a choice of not working here.
No.
There's no choice here
No.
in Accra. Whereas in the UK, if you can't get a job, there's the government are going to support you somehow. We have various programs that help people who've got nothing. But here, you have to work, and therefore on the side of the road, you see people selling anything, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
They will do whatever they can. They're not too proud. They will just get out there and work because you have to work. And I can't, part of me is like, well, perhaps we've become a little too proud or a little bit too lazy to work, or is it a good thing? We have these social programs. It's probably a mix of the two, but you just have no choice here. You have to go out and find a way of earning money or you don't eat.
Yeah, it's entrepreneurship born of necessity. It's hustling born of necessity, right? That's what you're dealing with. It's like, you don't eat.
Yeah.
Your kids don't eat if you don't do this. So you get out there and do the thing. And there's no safety net. Or the safety net is your family, which is much harder to rely on in the city, which has it's much higher expense to stay in the city, right? So it makes it's a compounding problem, right? And so, yeah, no, it's rough. And the more the currencies get squeezed, the more that taxation comes down on you. Guess what? It's even worse. Like, guys are hustling and they're really feeling the pinch. I was talking to one of the guys here today, and he was like, people are really struggling right now. Just in the last 3 weeks, things are already hard. And imagine how much harder they are when you lose 44% of your buying power overnight. It's hard to fathom.
Anything else for you?
Nothing that's standing out. One question on that. I imagine the vast majority of people are like going out and hustling and finding money, especially in like the villages we drove through today. But for people who work at like corporates and the government or whatever, what happened to their wages when the currency was cut 44%? Did anything?
They would still get
Did
the
they
same
get a pay
wage.
rise?
I would assume not. they would still make the same amount of money because it's really hard to change the bureaucracy of pay scales. Maybe people at the highest level of government can make changes faster, but your normal bureaucrat is just getting paid the same way they were before.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about Gridless?
You can. Doesn't matter. We talked about it before, so.
I know, but like some people might not have heard about it before, and
Sure.
we should talk about it because it's such a fascinating project. Just a TLDR reminder of what it is Gridless does.
Yeah, so Gridless is really, the mission for Gridless is, first of all, the goal is that we mine Bitcoin, okay? The mission, though, is how can we help decentralize the Bitcoin network by having Bitcoin mining happen in other parts of the world? Here in Africa, for instance. We currently operate mines in Kenya, Malawi, and Zambia. And, we'd like to see even more across the African continent. 2, we are trying to push energy electrification to the edges. Because right now, more than half of the people without energy in the world, without electricity, they don't have it at their homes, are in Africa. So how do you get electricity to those places? It turns out that Bitcoin mining is like the perfect partner for pushing energy out there because all of a sudden it makes an investment that used to take a 30-year return on investment to 5 to 7 years when you bundle them together. And so, for instance, you'll see this tomorrow, right? We're going to go to one of the mines, and that community has had that power for a few years, but they were only getting maybe, I think it was about 40% usage. So 60% of that water was just being wasted. It was going through the turbine. It was there, just being wasted. So what we did is we came in and they go immediately to 100% usage. When you go to 100% usage, all of a sudden you can be financially sustainable as a power company, and you can have some optionality in what you can do with your money now. You can be strategic for once.
Does that lower the prices for people locally using the grid, or does that difference just go to the electricity company, and that means they've got more money to invest elsewhere?
Yeah, so it differs on our different partners have different things that they're dealing with. So like in Kenya, it changed the price of power for the local community. But in Malawi, they already had a low price of power, but they couldn't afford the meters to put into new homes.
Right.
So it allowed them to afford meters. So within 3 months of us working with them, they had 200 more families connected to electricity.
So that's Bitcoin miners operating as like the buyer of last resort. We were speaking a little bit the other night, and you said you see a scenario where Bitcoiners may become the buyers of first resort.
Yeah, we need new energy to be developed. So for new energy to be developed, you have to have a business plan that works, that gives a good return on the investment. The fact that energy being built by these independent power producers into these mini grids is funded is actually a miracle. It's a fantasy by both the investors and the energy developers that they can actually get paid back. The numbers actually don't work. And we've seen this over and over and over again, which is why it takes 5, 6, 7 years before they get financed to build at all, right? So, however, you just add Bitcoin mining to that, whether it's a 50 kilowatt site, a 500 kilowatt site, or a 5 megawatt site. It changes the financials immediately. And as soon as you change those financials and you get 100% usage from day one, you know what actually happens is that, first of all, yeah, you get your return in 5 to 7 years. That's crazy. That's actually really good, especially for an infrastructure project, right? Number 2, what you get is you get a new base point for what power should actually cost. You know what that base point is? Our study of the data over the last 5 years, okay, day by day data of the price of energy, the price of Bitcoin, and the terahash per second, right, is that it's 7 to 9 cents. That's the big part of the whole curve.
Hour.
Yeah, 7 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Guess what? You now have a floor on what price should be in the community. And you know what our communities around here are paying? They're paying 26 cents per kilowatt. They're paying 95 cents per kilowatt hour.
Wow.
Doesn't make any sense, right? But if I can come in there and do mining and just say, okay, listen, we're a buyer of first resort. We're setting up this energy thing. Anybody else who wants to come and buy from us, just pay us, whatever the power price for Bitcoin is, +1. Use as much as you want. We'd rather turn off our miners and let you use the power.
It's kind of like the Irish model in some ways in Texas, right?
But it's the flip of it,
It's the
because
flip, yeah.
they're operating as the buyer of last resort. But
Yeah.
this is a new model where they're building out the energy infrastructure to be the buyer of first resort, and then offering energy to the people afterwards.
Are these mini grid operators, any of them holding Bitcoin?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we have 2 of our 4 partners that do hold it in Bitcoin. And if any of them want to sell it, we'll buy it from them too, just because it makes it easier for them. They don't know, some of them don't know how to sell it, so we'll buy it from them at market rate. But yeah, 2 of them do.
And if they're holding Bitcoin through a 44% currency devaluation,
That's a good thing. Yeah, that's a good thing.
did you even talk to them about that? Is that something that came up?
No,
Yeah. It's
know,
kind of fascinating,
yeah,
though, right?
Yeah. Well, and it becomes a case study then in the value of holding. So every time I go talk to, a week ago today, I was on the road in Western Kenya looking at new stranded energy, and having to do the same conversation that I have every time, which is talk to somebody who doesn't really know anything about Bitcoin, maybe heard of it once, and explain to them why. Because we don't pay a floor price for our energy. We do a rev share with our partner. They get 30% of the Bitcoin, and we get 70% of the Bitcoin for running it. Okay. And they're like, why would I want to get paid in that? Well, number one, you're not getting paid anything right now, so that's better than zero, right? But because Bitcoin can hold its value against the current currency, right? So do you want to hold Kenya shillings, or do you want to hold kwacha, or do you want to hold Bitcoin? Bitcoin, right, is a better bet. And so, cases like this make that a lot more clear, and we can now kind of show it to them and, just math it out.
And you originally obviously had a thesis, and you built a test side, but you've now raised money and you're scaling this business. Has anything changed for you in that kind of process of trying to scale? Like, what have you learned that's new?
Well, the biggest thing we just talked about, which is we thought we were mining. We thought we were kind of mining was the most important thing we did. And we've had a crash course in energy and realized that actually energy might be the most important thing we do. And mining is what holds it all up, right? That undergirds everything. Mining undergirds electrification. And if you can undergird electrification, you can change the base layer for human success, right? People can do things that they couldn't do before once they get these lights, right? Once they can charge their phone, once they can turn on a refrigerator, like that changes things. And we forget that when we live in places, even me living in Nairobi, where I have good power, good internet, good refrigerators and things like that. And when we come in there and we look at that base layer and we can say that changes because of electricity, and electricity changes because of Bitcoin mining, that's good for everybody. And there's nobody that can then look at the cases, look at the actual real data and refute it. It just works. There's nothing to fight against here. It's good for everyone.
So how big can this grow? I mean, how many sites can you have across Africa? I mean, is it like almost endless work?
So we have 600 million Africans who do not have access to electricity.
Yeah.
So let's start with going with that. That's your total addressable market right now.
And because of that, are you going to raise a shit ton of cash and just scale as quickly as possible?
You know that I'm a founding member of GAMA,
Yeah.
the Green Africa Mining Alliance. And I'll say this, I don't think Bitcoin is best served by us being the one company that has 500 sites.
Okay, no monopoly.
I think that it's better served when we have 500 Bitcoin miners with 10 sites. And so how do we get there? Like, yes, so we will have 10, 20 sites, and some of them will be, a 50 kilowatt site or a 500 kilowatt site, and we're going to have a couple of 5 or 10 megawatt sites too, right? But we're, where do I think it will go eventually? We have to be ideologically correct on this, and we also have to be practically good about running our business. And I think there's a balance there.
Yeah, but isn't that interesting in that traditionally as an entrepreneur, you have an opportunity to corner a market, you can go for it, you can raise money, you can build as quickly as possible. But actually with this, you're actually considering what is best for the Bitcoin network, but also what is best for probably for the African communities, in that a monopoly comes with risk.
Well, yeah, it's a little self-serving as well though, too, if I'm being honest, which is like, we don't want to be the only target.
Okay.
Right? So
Fair.
We want a lot of other miners out there. It's good for us.
And are there others doing the same as this now out there?
Yeah, it's great. There's guys, you got Trojan Mining in Nigeria that just put up their first 500 kilowatt site. You've got QRB Labs in Ethiopia that's opening up another 20 megawatt site. You've got Quantum Hash Computing down in Zambia that's doing their first 500 kilowatt site. You've got, of course, our friends from the Congo, right? The big block data center guys that are doing awesome stuff in Virunga Park and looking at other countries now as well. So yeah, there's like 5-6 companies that are moving, and I think we're just going to get more.
Isn't it fascinating as well when you look at, I think I brought this up in our last interview, when you look at someone like Elizabeth Warren with her anti-crypto army, anti-Bitcoin army, somebody who traditionally has said she speaks for the little guy, right? She supports the little guy. She was against big banks and Wall Street. And she's working actively against Bitcoin. And she's actively working against it. Yet you see these projects and you think, how can you work against this? What is wrong with you?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm not going to disagree with you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that there's people who are not being intellectually honest about Bitcoin because it's not in their best interest to do so. And you see it all over the place. And the only way to counter that, I think, is that you give people real stories, you give them real data, and you show what changes. And if they can look in the face of that, they can still come back to you and say, this is bad for the world, then at least it shows their true colors.
Yeah.
And it makes it harder for them to hide behind some virtue signaling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think it's amazing. I can't wait to see the site tomorrow. From seeing it on an iPhone when you're up on top of a hill to us. By the way, are we walking up that hill?
So that hill was in Kenya. So this, we're going to be driving up some roads that were, listen, just be glad it's not raining.
We are walking up this hill tomorrow, though, aren't we?
It's more of a mountain.
It's a mountain, yeah. Yes, if you're up for it, we will be walking up it.
You doing it?
I've eaten well here. I'm going to need to get up there. But look, thank you for bringing us out here to do this. It's incredible. Incredible spot to do an interview. To go from the point of having that first conversation to be here is a little bit surreal, but it's amazing. And I just think more people need to travel and go out and see these things and try and get a better understanding. I'm trying to listen more. I'm trying to say less, just to understand.
Wow.
But
listen, I'm tickled pink that you guys are here. It's good for people. You have a large megaphone, and it's good that you get some context on things and can tell people this. You can tell a story in a way I wouldn't even tell it, right? Because you have a way with words, right? This is why you have a good podcast, right? And so I'm excited for you to see it so that you can actually get a visceral understanding of it. What we do is, like, tomorrow you will be talking to the villagers, you'll be talking to the chiefs. I'm not even there. I don't care what they say because I know what they're going to say, right? I know they're going to say there's a value addition here. This has made our lives better, right? And go find out for yourself. Don't go to any house. You don't need me to take you to one.
Do you even talk to them about Bitcoin?
A little bit. They have no understanding of it. All this is a data center to them most of the time.
That gives them power.
Well, no, it's like this. We are the biggest customer for the power company so that their power works better. That's all they care about. And because we're there, that power company can now pay its operational costs, like salaries for the line workers and the guys who run the powerhouse. So they're happy, and they're from the village too. So there's an advantage to that. So they just know that we're a big customer,
right.
And they're happy about it.
And is there anyone like listening that you would want to reach out to? Is there anyone you specifically want to talk to right now about this?
Well, I don't know if there's anybody specific. I'd say that I think there's some real opportunities, not just for us too, but for others, where some of the large miners, like your own sponsors, Iris Energy, could be working with some of the smaller miners who are getting started here to get to better scale by helping them with maybe some of their older miners, putting them to work here in Africa, because they have good, 3, 5, 7 more years of life, and that'd be a fantastic thing to see.
What generation miners still work here?
So a lot of times we're using M30s, M30Ss, like that. Listen, what's miner is the best thing on the continent. Bitmain will fail here over and over again.
Because of the weather?
No, it's the bugs, isn't it?
Oh, it's the bugs.
There's bugs, there's dust, there's the heat, all these kind of things. And immersion cooling is a harder thing to do here because of the supply chain for the oil
Right.
and maintenance and things like that. So it can be done, and there's going to be large farms, especially set up in Ethiopia, that can do that. But I think there's, for running these, 500 kilowatt site to 5 megawatt sites, it's going to be air cooled.
Erik sent me a picture a long time ago of the bugs in the back of one of these miners. We'll put it on the video. It was like caked in bugs. It was like an inch thick of bugs. In the back of the
it's
farm.
like we had the West miners were still running, 40% capacity, but they were running, and it took us like 3 days to clean all the bugs out of that whole mining container with toothbrushes.
Can it be dual use? Can it be, like you get those mozzie catching things?
You
we
could
have
eat
dual
'em.
use. Put a little miner up, hang it here to get all the mozzies.
I don't know if that's the best use case.
Erik, brilliant, man. Well, listen, where should people go?
Go to gamma.africa to learn more about what Gamma does. We have a new program called the Seed Program, where it's getting refurbished but running miners to new people across Africa who want to start mining. So if you want to support that program, that'd be amazing. And then go to gridlesscompute.com to learn more about us if you want, or at gridlesscompute on Twitter.
Amazing. It's been so cool to see the journey of this from when we first spoke. And again, just thanks for having us here, and off we go tomorrow.
Let's go.
Awesome.
I've
Thank you,
also
guys.
just seen a frog hop into the camera bag.
Did you? A frog's gone in the bag.
Yeah.
Love it.